Hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Kuntz. I am the Richardson-Sloane Special Collections Supervisor at the Davenport Public Library. Thank you for joining us today for this addition to the Preservation Workshop series. We'll be sharing information about reformatting materials from physical to microfilm and microfiche. We'll start by covering the topics that we'll share today in this presentation. So we will cover what is microfilm or microfiche, the reasons for reformatting from physical to microfilm or microfiche, the benefits and challenges of microfilming, the process of microfilming, and we'll cover some microfilming projects here at the Richardson-Sloane Special Collection Center. So we'll get going into what is microfilm and microfiche. So what is this? We've probably all encountered some exposure to microfilm, even if it's just in pop culture. So whenever anyone's going to go do research at the library, they sit down in front of a large computer screen and images are floating past. So that is going to be microfilm. So that's typically how newspapers are preserved. That's kind of the most common materials that we kind of can think offhand that are microfilmed, but lots more, a lot more materials and different formats are microfilmed for ease of access and use by everyone. So what is microfilm or microforms? So there's lots of different, there's many different styles of microforms. So there's microfilm and microfiche, and there's different sizes within that. So they can be rolled film or microfilm or microfiche that are flat and have many images on them. Like other film-based formats, they were produced on different bases. So that's the material that the actual film is made out of at different times. So around the turn of the century, that's when microfilm really got its start. It was a fine grain, high resolution photographic film capable of recording images. They were typically used to capture and reproduce materials to share widely. And they were heavily used during World War II. But things have kind of changed over the last few years. Implementation of digitization has kind of changed how we use microfilm, but it's still a very stable format and accessible without any aid of a machine. So you can just view microfilm with light and magnification. But back to kind of how microfilm got its start. So very early microfilm typically was produced on nitrate base, and that's unlikely to be encountered just because that's a very unstable base, and they've probably been migrated to some other format, hopefully. So other microforms that were produced between 1930s and 1970s are likely to be on acetate base. And so they also can kind of suffer some issues with preservation. So they suffer from a issue called vinegar syndrome. So that term comes from the distinctive odor given off during the deterioration process. So here at the Davenport Public Library, we do have some materials that are on acetate base and they are smelling a little vinegary, but we just try and slow that down by keeping the temperatures cooler and putting them in acid-free boxes and help mitigate that process of deterioration that happens to all materials. So from the mid-70s onward, Microfilm has been produced on polyester film base. So black and white polyester film has a life expectancy of 500 years plus under proper storage conditions. So you can't really beat 500 years of access to materials without too many issues. So, but things do come into play when with the materials, because if it's used, that just increases the deterioration of the item, things like that. But there are 3 of the most common types of microforms are described below. So we'll kind of go over those. And so for there are also 2 other less common types, the electrophotographic and the thermoplastic film and dry silver film. And so those other types of methods of creating microfilm aren't as readily popular in libraries and in archives and records management facilities. So the 3 that are the silver gelatin or the silver halide. Those are microforms that are based on black and white photography. They're used in conjunction with a polyester base. These are the only preservation quality microforms used in for archival purposes. The image is produced by exposing light sensitive silver compounds in a film emulsion to light. The resulting image is a chemically developed. The emulsion side of the film is matte and the non-emulsion side is glossy. So these are the ones that you're going to typically run into. Then we also have the diazo microforms. These are on acetate or polyester base. They are coated with an emulsion of diazoaminium salts and dye couplers, and then a stabilizing agent. The film is exposed to UV light, which then breaks down the diazo compound. And processed black diazo resembles silver gelatin, but is glossy on both sides. So you can see that when you're handling materials, whether or not they are those different forms. And then vesicular microforms. So this is the diazoaminium salt coating and it is sandwiched between 2 polyester base layers. The film is exposed via contact printing from the master printing. It is developed by heating the film. This momentarily softens the base material, causing expanding nitrogen to form tiny bubbles or vesiculars that remain in the film after it's cooled. The residual photosensitive material is then fixed by exposing the film to UV radiation, causing complete decay of the salts. Incident light passes through the clear layer of the film, but is scattered and reflected by the bubbles, causing those areas to look like little vesicles. Those are the 3 main types that you'll come across. So you'll be able to tell which ones in the microfilm that is the silver gelatin. So that's typically the master copy, and then they'll make the other types for use, just because then those aren't, you're keeping one of those types of microfilm rolls safe. Then you'll have the different types of gauges for microfilms. So typical microfilm comes with 3 widths or gauges. So there's the 16 millimeter. That is typically used to film single page manuscripts or like letter size or legal size documents. There's also the 35 millimeter used for oversized materials such as maps and newspapers, as well as brittle books. And so that's just the oversized documents. As you're looking through those materials, you can kind of see the different sizes. And so also Larger documents will fit differently onto microfilm if it's the 35 millimeter or the 16 millimeter. So you'll kind of, if you are looking at microfilming a particular collection, you'll have to look at the size and the benefits of which gauge of microfilm you would want to go with. So that's another thing, because you're going to be reducing that document to fit onto whatever size microfilm gauge you choose. So then for the other one, so there's also microfiche. So the 105 millimeter microfilm gauge is used to make the microfiche. And so you can kind of see the different options that you have there. And those are the three most common types. So also something to consider is the film thickness. So some areas, some organizations that you can get your materials professionally microfilmed at, they might have different options for you. This can be anywhere from 2.5 to 7 millimeters thick. So 5 mils is about the industry standard. The thickness of the microfilm determines the strength and the number of images on each roll. So a 16 millimeter, 200 foot roll at 2.5 mil thickness will contain about 5,000 images. A standard roll at 16 millimeter at 5 mil thickness and 100-foot roll can contain about 2,000 to 2,500 images. And then the standard roll for 100 feet, which that's typical length of most microfilm rolls at 35 millimeter at 5 mils thick, it can record up about 2,000 images. So that's kind of the differences between those types of formats. So then you have the different types of formats. So you have the rolled microforms that are often called serialized microforms and may be housed on reels, cartridges, or cassettes. And so the open roll or the reel, those are a continuous length of microfilm wound around a spool. This form is the least expensive to create and easy to distribute. It is become really common and is used because it is used because of a large amount of information can be stored on one roll. Also, the roll film is commonly used for storage of the master negative. File integrity can be guaranteed as it is impossible to alter the film space. Therefore, roll film format is ideal for records that may be involved in legal or administrative proceedings. And then we also have cartridges. Cartridges are a roll of microfilm placed in a special plastic case. We've actually seen some of the city archives are housed in plastic cartridge cases. And so we had to open that up and then rewind it onto an open reel case because we didn't have any machine to view it. So this form actually requires, as I was saying, special retrieval equipment, but does protect the microfilm from dust and fingerprints. So it's like putting a little cassette tape into a player instead of having the film be exposed to people's touching and things like that. So that's another type of way to access the film. And then there's also the cassettes, so those are similar. And then also microforms are on the 16 or 35 millimeter and typically come in the 100-foot lengths. cartridges and cassettes for microforms are rare because they do require those special equipments. And then unitized microforms are microfilms that have been cut into units. These also include microfiche or jacketed microfilm. So microfiche is 105 millimeter by 148 millimeters, so 4 by 6 inches in size. And this contains multiple images in a row or in columns. So, and then jacketed microfilm are sleeves of multiple rows of microfilm, and they are typically utilized for records that are frequently updated. So those are a little bit different options, but never, you should never jacket silver gelatin master negatives, because using jackets compromises the file integrity because the film can be removed from the sleeve. Often inexpensive duplicate microfiche are made from for distribution from the jacketed microfilm. So those are kind of the different varieties of microfilm and microfiche, and we have all three types in our collection, and I'm pretty sure we have the different master, silver gelatin, the diazo microforms. I'm not 100% about the vesticular ones, but I believe we have some acetate, and those are the early newspapers. But we'll go on and we'll talk about the reasons for microfilming. So, some various reasons for microfilming and the importance to do so. So, the purpose of microfilming is similar to that of digitization. So, that's our current way that we are providing access and providing a use copy for materials or another format to preserve the item in, because we still maintain the original items as well, because those are important to keep. It is similar to digitization. So for collections that have greater informational value than artifactual, so materials that list content about something, and that's more important than the actual item itself as a physical object. So that's one way to determine whether or not you should microfilm. So like the big ledger books from like the early 1900s and the 1800s, they do have artifactual value, but also the information inside those volumes is really important too, because they have early decision making from cities, the governance of city and county and state governments, things like that. And also for those with such tremendous artifactual value or fragility that they should not be routinely handled by researchers, microfilming provides an access to the surrogate for the original item. So just like I was saying with the big ledger books, they are important documents and materials that have artifactual value, and they're very cumbersome and heavy to handle. So that's another reason why microfilming is such a good thing to provide access to that content, so that we're not handling those materials on a daily basis and causing more damage over time. So records come in a variety of shapes and sizes and types, such as hard hand-copied ledger books, newspaper files, various forms created over time to record information for licenses, court orders, and permits. There are sometimes unstable or heavily used records, and they also may require transfer to another format, such as microfilm or to permanent paper, to ensure the preservation of information that they contain. So these are also just creating duplicate copies to make sure that this material can stay with us as long as possible. So some other things to consider is if items are highly actively used. So if they're used on a daily basis and they need access from a lot of people, that's another reason to maybe microfilm materials. Records requiring distribution of multiple copies. So say if you're a federal or a state government or even a county government and you have to share records out to multiple principalities or municipalities, you need to get those out to multiple people. And so people don't want large ledger books or boxes full of papers that contain the same information. They might just say, oh, a microfilm roll is just perfect with me. And then also another thing to consider is when microfilms, to microfilm is when items become inactive. So many record series need to be retained permanently or for many years, but receive little access after the first few years. And these records are in good candidates for microfilming. Typical examples include electronic signature cards or student records. And so it depends on that too. So records identified as permanent. So that might just help preserve those types of records that we need to keep for long-term storage. And then also records with historical or research value. So these are also good candidates for microfilming. For some records, research value may be obvious, but for others, it may take a careful look and a careful review of the records to evaluate that. Evaluating potential research value is an important part of caring for records, and it should be considered for all records before destruction. So we have systems in place with different organizations across the city and then Scott County that they'll, before an item has met its, or at the time when it's met its retention schedule, it might be offered up to a local institution, and this is common across the whole of US. And so those are kind of different avenues to look at while doing that. And then also other times when reformatting or conversion is an option. So it's also good to always analyze the records and see if they need to have this type of digitization or preservation kind of activity taken upon them. So historical or otherwise valuable records that are in bad physical condition, records that have long retention periods or permanent or vital or historical, records that have high retrieval rate, as we kind of mentioned before, records that are needed by multiple users or at multiple locations, have important research value, that are bulky or oversized. So one item that we have digitized or microfilmed in our collection are probate records. We also do have the originals as well, boxed up and folded individually by the name of who held the probate or the will. But to research using those, it's quite different because you're hauling a big box and you have to go through folders and pieces of paper. Whereas on the probate, you can search an index, find the number, and go specifically to that person and just see their records on a film of a 35 millimeter roll of microfilm. Also records that need to be stored separately for security reasons, and then records that incorporate workflow, so purchase orders, things like that. So different avenues for looking at reasons for reformatting materials. So up in our pictures, we have pictures of district court records, city council indexes and things like that. And then our large ledger books in our closed stacks. So those are just records that we don't want to damage the original item by bringing it out, because each time we do that, it does increase its deterioration. So what are some benefits and challenges of microfilming? So some good reasons for doing this is that so while microfilm is clearly no longer the most user-friendly medium for access, it is a product that is of a tested technology with active standards and guidelines. It also helps provide a master copy from which relatively inexpensive duplicates can be easily made. Unlike digital media, which cannot be read without computer access, microfilm can be read by the naked eye with only light source and magnification. So that's a really good benefit for microfilming, especially large record sets and things like that. So some advantages: it saves space. So up to 95% of the space that original materials. So original materials, if they're not accessed that much, could go off to an offsite storage with better temperature and humidity controls, while the microfilm stays at the institution itself or the reading room and offers access to those materials without damaging those originals. Cost saving in terms of reproduction and distribution. So easily can print or digitally capture images from microfilm. The print medium is archivally stable and has estimated shelf life of over 500 years. It is analog and information that can be recovered from a medium source with magnifying glass. And it is the only source of some material. So that's another type of way to look at it. Microfilm standard formats with generally low tech and low cost retrieval for equipment. So a lot of so most institutions that have large collections of microfilm will have at least one microfilm reader, but here at the Richardson-Sloane Special Collection Center, we have 7 different types, or 7 microfilm readers, or no, 8 actually. So we have 3 digital and then 5 more analog or manual style. And then also another advantage is that the materials can be easily indexed during the production. And then also there are also benefits of using different types of microfilm readers. So the one that we have on the image on the screen is a digital reader. So it has a computer associated with it with some software attached. And so you can put the microfilm reel on or microform or fiche onto the platform or onto the little spool, and you can go through that roll and find the materials that you need. You can screen capture whatever page you would like from the film, and you can save that onto a USB, email, you can print it, or you could just browse it. So that's another option. And then these are our 5 more manual style microfilm readers. And so they also do similar things. So they can be, you could view microfiche and microfilm on them. But the only disadvantage is that you can't do anything digital with them. You can browse and print the pages that you would like to save for later. But on the opposite side, so what are some disadvantages of microforms or the challenges for them? So patrons must use magnification to use the medium. Reader and scanners can be difficult to operate, so some of them can be overly complex. Readers and scanners can break down or not be available, so some of this technology is getting older and it's not getting replaced, or it's being updated to other formats, things like that. So digital readers are a lot more popular than the more analog ones, but both have their advantages. And items can be easily misfiled in high density cases. And then also it's not as convenient and it lacks features available with digital formats. So some digital formats you can OCR, so that's optical character recognition. So you can keyword search across documents and find exactly what you're looking for. But Microform does have a lot of indexing associated with it. So a lot of diligent work and time has gone into making these formats accessible as well. So, and there's also different types of lenses to view different types of film. So we have building permits. Ours require a different lens to view them. So that's a little bit challenging. So that would require a staff member to put that new lens in for the patron to view those materials. But those are some of the benefits and challenges of microfilming. So next we'll go over the process for microfilming. There's a lot of different things to consider with this, especially depending on the size of the material, the collection that you're hoping to microfilm. And so some institutions and organizations, the collecting body, may wish to invest in buying materials to microfilm themselves. This can be a costly and prohibitive for a smaller institution. So with most of our digitization or our microfilming projects, we have outsourced that to companies who specialize in microfilming. And so we've written a number of grants to provide funding to support this activity of preservation and providing access. So some guidelines for preservation microfilming. For specific guidelines, you can, for preservation microfilming geared towards libraries, archives, and other institutions that hold paper collections. The Research Library Group has produced 3 publications that have become considered the de facto standards in the field. So there's the RLG Preservation Microfilming Handbook from 1992, the RLG Archives Microfilming Manual from 1994, and the RLG Guidelines for Microfilming to Support Digitization was published in 2003. And these should be consulted by any institution planning to preserve their materials through a microfilming project. So these guidelines typically specify materials and procedures that must be used to ensure the permanence of the film that is produced. So the film type, all preservation microfilm must be produced on a polyester base. Types of microfilm include silver gelatin, the most stable. Diazo and vesicular are less expensive but not as stable. Continuous tone microfilms such as silver gelatin film that can be very stable and is used for filming photographs and similar materials. A color microfilm, and that has a lifetime storage of several hundred years if stored in dark conditions, in dark storage. You'll also want to consider the film format. So They typically recommend the 35mm roll format, which provides a larger, better quality image than the microfiche or my 16mm film generations that are encouraged to have to meet these standards are the 3 generations of microfilm that can be produced: the camera negative, so the film used in the camera, a duplicate negative, and then 1 or more positive service copies for the researcher use and interlibrary loan. Then we also have the film quality and processing. So RLG guidelines specify requirements for reduction ratio, so the number of times the original is reduced, the orientation of the film on the film, the legibility of the background, so the background density and resolution, processing of the exposed film, and inspection of the film and correction of mistakes, the number of splices allowed. So there are different types of ways to orient the film or orient the image. So records can either be filmed in comic or scene mode. So the comic mode of records are arranged on the film from left to right like a comic strip. The scene mode images are arranged with bottom of the image above the top of the next one, as in a movie film. Image orientation is usually dependent on the size and proportions of the documents. Horizontal images tend to be filmed in comic mode. 16mm mode or is comic mode allows for the most images per roll. So depending on the size, you'll want to orient those in different ways. So another thing to consider is the filming process. So we'll go to the next page. And so this image actually, before we go to the next page, are images from when we microfilmed, it looks like some early newspapers from the Quad Cities. So that is our former library director, Amy Groskopf, and a volunteer who are separating the bound materials and are preparing the materials for processing. So for most institutions, contracting out for microfilming services is the most efficient and most cost-effective choice. Setting up an in-house lab to produce microfilm that conforms to standards and guidelines for preservation filming is extremely difficult and expensive. The basic procedure involved in preservation microfilming are as follows. So you want to prepare the collections for filming. The materials are examined page by page to ensure that they are in the correct order and nothing is missing. Targets are created to tell the processor who's photographing the materials when there's informational sheets with bibliographic information, condition information that are photographed to assist using with the item to assist the user. So in some of our films, it will say that there's pages missing or that the page is torn, and that's how it came to the photographer. If there's any reel breaks, and if they and where the reel breaks, so those are also determined. So how many volumes are going to be on a particular roll, depending on the size of the items, things like that. And then during the review process, special instructions for the filmers are noted. Materials are shipped to the vendor. So another thing that you're going to want to look at when you're preparing these materials is to make sure that the file organization is how you want them to be permanently accessed on the microfilm. So you may have to rearrange on how they're organized, or if it's chronological, things like that. are also found with the bound volume in a way that people can access them. Purging unneeded documents. So if there are those random files or something else slipped in, to get rid of those. Fasteners, staples, rubber bands, other items to disbind the materials. So they're razoring bound or unbound newspapers into separate sheets so that they can be microfilmed. So doing things like that. So getting rid of the spine so that they can be easily and that's called guillotining the bound volumes, and it the process essentially destroys the binding. This process is not appropriate if the volume is to be retained for its historic or artistic value. So you don't want to do that with every item, but if it is a library binding, say that the item has already lost its original binding, it's not going to, that binding is not artifactual or artistic in value. If the volume has to be disbound, there is less labor involved in handling the pages, and they will lie flat. This reduces the filming costs and increases the quality of the film. If the binding is to be cut, this should be stipulated in the specification. So usually after the volumes are disbound in this manner, they are legally destroyed after microfilming. Repairing any torn documents, so mending any tears or big areas of damage, flattening anything, things like that. Flattening rolled or folded items, and then targeting, that is, it was briefly mentioned, but it is the appropriate use of targets are essential. Targets are used in the production of microfilm to certify that information is accurate, to identify the contents of each roll of microfilm, to verify that the film has met minimum quality control standards. Specific targets are placed at the beginning and the end of each roll. Several different kinds of targets are used in the production of quality microfilm. Administrative targets, such as the certification target, verify that the film is accurate reproduction of genuine local governments. Records, informational targets such as the roll number, the start, title, defect, and end targets, and provide readers with critical information about the roll and the records that are microfilmed. Correctional targets, which identify and correct errors in the microfilm, and technical targets that are such as the resolution and density targets are used to monitor the quality of the microfilm. So this you can find on, we had some materials sent to Utah, and they had microfilmed our materials, and they had a nice that has all the on like the density, the types of readers, and even said who microfilmed it. So we can have all that type of provenance information along with the filming. So those are things that you want to also be considering as you are going through this process. So then the actual filming of the microfilm. So there's a planetary camera, so where both the camera and the material are stationary during the filming. This is most commonly used. Bound materials may be filmed using a book cradle, so that will help stabilize the material as it's getting photographed. Manual exposure is usually necessary for collections with various variations in paper, color, texture, and ink. So there's a lot of other different types of cameras out there. So if I have a great bibliography at the end of this presentation that you can take a look at. So then just going through the film processing. So silver gelatin film processors may be tabletop or deep tank models. They develop, fix, wash, and dry the film. Filmers should use control strips daily to check the performance of the processor, so the liquid that they're running the film through. Polysulfide treatment. So this treatment was developed to combat the formation of redox spots or rings on the silver microfilm. So typically with the dry silver gelatin, common issues is on the microfilm. This is environmental conditions and exposure to pollutants, but this treatment helps combat that. So the polysulfide treatment, which converts the silver to a form that better resists oxidation, can be used during the initial process. Alternatively, it can be provided for the master and duplicate negatives after all quality inspections have been done, or it can be applied to older film as long as the film has not yet deteriorated. So quality control. So before duplication, the master negative is inspected for proper resolution and density. The methylene blue test for residual thiosulfates during process and polysulfide test as needed for polysulfiding treatment was applied during the original process are conducted. So the master negative is inspected frame by frame to ensure that each document has been filmed in the correct duplication. The choice of film for duplicates will depend on the cost and use patterns. Silver film is preferred for duplicate negatives and should receive the treatment of the polysulfide. Diazo and vesicular films are cheaper and less prone to scratching. Duplicate films are inspected for resolution, density, and completeness. And then the return of the film and the originals to the institution. So original materials are generally returned at the same time to the facility as the film for inspection. Master negatives should never be shipped in the same box or on the same day with their service copies or duplicate negatives. If possible, master negatives should be shipped by the vendor directly to the offsite storage. Post-filming activities, so recommended to do in-house quality control inspections once the film returns. So make sure that all the targets are there, inspect the film, the packaging, the labeling, as well as more comprehensive technical inspection for the density, resolution, scratches, problematic spices, and other problems. And then also you want to store the microfilm in the best possible way. So you'll want to use archival enclosures, maintain, and also have them maintain microfilm readers regularly, insist researchers in use of the microfilm instead of making the original materials available. Master negatives should be stored offsite, and they should not also be stored next to other materials, the other copies. So the off-gassing of both the silver and the diazo and other types of microfilm, they might off-gas, increase the deterioration rate. Be mindful of, and then the temperature and humidity conditions are proper of these materials. So some microfilming projects in the Richardson-Sloane Special Collection Center. So this is these are a couple of photographs of a collection of Scott County Board of Supervisor ledger books, as well as minutes of incorporated city councils in Scott County that was done in around 2009. And so this project was partially funded by the Resource Enhancement and Protection program through the Historical Resource Development Program. So this was funded by the State Historical Society. We applied for a grant and were able to work with them and get these documents digitized by Heritage Microfilms. So we as an organization reached out to not only our own city government in Davenport, but many across Scott County. So this was truly a collaborative project. So we have copies of the microfilm in our facility, as well as does the state library, the State Historical Society. And then we returned all the originals to the incorporated cities. And so it really shows the importance of working together collaboratively to preserve our history. And so the historical resources in this project are both the earliest surviving city council minutes of 10 incorporated municipalities in Scott County and the earliest minutes from the Scott County Board of Supervisors. The towns included in this project are Bettendorf, Bluegrass, Buffalo, Davenport, including Rockingham prior to its annexation, Durant, Long Grove, Eldridge, Panorama Park, Princeton, and Riverdale. So we had to work with a number of different organizations to get access to their minutes of their city council, as well as working with them to prepare their materials, transport it to the Heritage Microfilms, and then also return them. So this project was funded, and you can come down and see the materials yourself. We also have worked with the Scott County Genealogical Society, who have tirelessly volunteered to microfilm and preserve Scott County vital records. They worked predominantly with the Scott County Courthouse and their recorder's office to prepare and prep all these materials for microfilming. We have the results of those in our collection, and we have many more. And we also have lots of indexes that go along with these microfilm reels. Some of them do have indexes that were found in the bound volumes themselves, but a lot of work has been done with providing access and maintaining that we can provide these materials for our users in the future. So please come down and check them out. It's great amount of effort and work that have gone into these. So this is one of our older microfilm readers, and so we no longer have this because the materials and the cost to repair it became too much. But that's just another version of those. And then there is a picture of some of our Scott County Clerk of Courts merit certificates for Scott County. So if you have an ancestor who was married in this area in Scott County, you can come down and look and see if they're in there. There's my bibliography. I could not have done this presentation without these valuable resources. Please check them out. They're wonderful tools, especially if you're interested in microfilming. And there's a lot out there to help you, or to consider this for your institution or your collections, and then also just for fun to look at. And so one thing to mention before we go is that there is a trend to digitize microfilm. So a lot of different institutions have done this for a variety of reasons, but one most notable institution or organization that has done this is Family Search. So they have started to digitize their microfilm to make them more accessible online. And so if you go on to Family Search and do your family history or search for someone else that you're interested in, you can possibly come across these digitized microfilms. So it's just another avenue and evolution of preserving local history, historical items. So I just want to thank everyone for attending this presentation. If you have any questions, please contact us. All of our contact information is listed on the screen. If you want to see what types of materials we have in our collections, you can search our catalog at davenportlibrary.com. There's also our archive and manuscript catalog in the Upper Mississippi Digital Image Archive, and you can also follow us on social media. Thank you so much, and join us next time for the preservation workshop.